WhenTheAdultsChange.com.
Tom Vodden, it is lovely to have you here. Can you just introduce yourself? Give us a flavour of your experience.
Okay, well, it is equally lovely to be here, Paul, and thanks for the invitation. So, my background is mainstream and special education. Originally trained as an RE specialist and head of faculty, head of humanities, and subsequently worked in Australia in a residential special school and in other specialist settings in Bristol, which is where I'm based. After that, I established a business called a school software company, which developed management information software for schools, and predominantly with a focus on behaviour and inclusion, and currently a full-time student studying occupational psychology, but still doing training and consultancy work with schools, and also the Link Safeguarding Governor of a specialist autism setting in Bristol called Venturers Academy.
Brilliant. So you are more than qualified to talk on the questions that I've got for you today. No, don't. That's not for you to answer, right? Because nobody can answer that question. So I'd like to talk to you about schools that are shifting towards relational practice. Many schools are doing exactly that. And what a leadership team needs to think about in terms of students who are neurodivergent.
Okay. I think, and speaking as an ADHDer myself, I think there's probably another angle that I can add in addition to my professional insight is perhaps my lived experience, and also as the parent of two children who are neurodivergent. I think one of the things which is most significant is around training and understanding. And I think the difficulty, particularly for schools, in supporting children who have got a neurodevelopmental condition, be that autism or ADHD, is it's a hidden disability. And I think that presents with quite a unique challenge in a lot of cases, and particularly for children who on occasion may stand out because of their behaviour, but more so those children who desperately want to fit in, who really go under the radar and are perhaps withdrawn and isolated in class or in a school setting, struggle with social environments, but really are quite easy to kind of miss because they maybe don't present with some of the more observable behaviours that may indicate that there's something that, requires support or challenge. So I think that would be certainly one of my observations, and I think we only need to look at the high numbers of SEN children who are excluded from mainstream settings.
Yeah.
And I think also put that within the context of the current concerns that we have nationally around attendance. And it's about, I think, trying to understand from a different perspective the implications of a school setting which we may not necessarily see as presenting with any barriers or obstacles, and trying to understand those from a slightly different perspective. And I think sometimes if we talk about the neurotypical perspective, so that high percentage of the population who don't perhaps have an underlying neurodevelopmental condition, it's very difficult, I think, to walk in the shoes of those children who really struggle, who may present with a hidden disability, which means that it's easy for them to blend in and not to be seen. And I think that's the biggest barrier. I think there are also concerns that I have, genuine concerns, And this, I think, as well comes back to training. The Panorama documentary recently on ADHD, where I'm seeing members of the teaching profession using that as an opportunity to challenge the validity of ADHD, as an example.
Yeah.
And I think that sends some really corrosive messages for children who are struggling. But also neurodivergent professionals who may also equally be hidden in the staff room.
Which is an interesting point, and we've talked about that, which is that of course schools recognise neurodivergent children,
Yeah,
but they've also got neurodivergent staff,
yeah,
and they are already making adjustments and reasonable adjustments for those adults.
yeah,
But yet sometimes sometimes it's hidden with the children so that they're not employing those same strategies.
I mean, I think there are 2 points there. I think there's an extent to which some schools are accommodating neurodivergent professionals. My current work within the corporate world, doing consultancy around equality, inclusion and diversity,
Yeah.
would suggest the picture isn't quite as rosy. And I think certainly recently there's been a report written that's come out of Birkbeck University, Birkbeck College, London University, looking at neurodiversity in the workplace. And I think that when you look at the employment rates for adults within the neurodivergent community, there are serious implications, and one of the reasons for that are broader social and cultural issues which have led to high levels of discrimination, which means that irrespective of where people are employed, there is a real concern that people are able to be them true, that bring their true selves to work.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I'm doing at the moment, I've just carried out a survey of a group of managers for a large utilities firm, and what we're looking at is staff confidence working with members of their team who are who have a neurodevelopmental condition. And it's really interesting to get the perspective of that group of managers. And then I've been speaking to, and I'm going to continue my conversation with, the disability support group within the same organisation to understand whether that picture actually joins up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing for schools, irrespective of whether they're talking about their staff or whether they're talking about children, that need to listen and that need not to assume, that need not to build an approach based on stereotypes, some of which really limit the way we can either support adults or children, is really important. And I think I spoke about the damage of that Panorama documentary, and it was really felt quite acutely by the ADHD community in a number of ways. But those negative stereotypes, but also the stereotypes that you will hear, and there are one or two very high profile senior leaders in the country that I've heard saying they need routine, referring to autistic children, which is a really reductionist and very simplistic understanding.
And I was going to ask you about absolutely my next question, absolutely, which is the claim made by people who want a sort of a zero or low tolerance approach to behaviour is that we are championing learners with additional needs because we have structure and we have discipline and we have absolute routines and in that environment they feel safe.
I always like to try and sit and steer the middle ground, because I think it's really important that we reflect the reality and particularly at the moment the challenges that are faced within schools. I think sometimes what is operationally efficient takes priority over things that will actually make a difference. And I think the thing is with routine, if we consider autistic children perhaps, is there is an argument that routine is helpful, and it is arguably the case that most autistic children struggle with change. But the question here is whose routine? And an imposed routine, to assume that an imposed routine is in itself sufficient, is a little naive, because it doesn't really understand, or it shows a scant understanding of the complexity that people's routines are different. Now, you situate that within the context of what I've just mentioned in terms of the challenges facing schools in terms of human resource, in terms of high turnover of staff. We've discussed issues around recruitment and retention. And I absolutely get how difficult this is. As a classroom teacher, I understand how hard that is. But I don't think it's necessarily helpful to dismiss it from the conversations, because if we exclude it from our conversations, then we put ourselves in a position where we simply accept the status quo. And I think there are bigger political considerations, Paul, that have become more of a concern for me in recent years, because I do think schools are expected to do things with one hand tied behind their back.
Without a doubt. I mean, absolutely. And the reduction in resources and the reduction in people who are there either in the school or supporting from the outside, is stark wherever you go. I don't think I've been to a school recently that hasn't mentioned in the same breath as behaviour, resources and resourcing of the school.
Yeah, and I think that, it's a very real challenge. And I think you add to that a standards agenda, which I think is becoming more and more stringent and less helpful, in particular for those children with additional needs. If we take, for example, attendance, and we look at the expectations around attendance, the reality is there is insufficient resource currently for schools to be able to address attendance issues in the way that is actually going to make a difference.
Yeah.
And what I've seen recently just feels a rehash of what has gone before. And that seems utterly illogical to me. And I think if you look at a number of indicators at the moment in terms of real concerns about the way that schools are inspected, significant issues around recruitment and retention, and not just teachers, but at a senior leadership level.
Yeah.
You then look at issues around attendance and the significant concern there is about attendance. And it's almost to me as if people are ignoring the elephant in the room. And so I understand sometimes why schools go to the most efficient and obvious way of getting everybody to be doing the same thing. But I'm not sure that it really makes a difference to the children who most need that support. And I think it takes courage to kind of step outside the mould. And it's about, I think the thing is, my experience, and I remember this very acutely working with a group of children in this residential school in Australia, residential special school, is that we had a young man who suffered with quite significant fitting. And I remember the response. We were in a park in Sydney one day, quite a long way from the school, and the young man started to fit. And the response of the children was unbelievable. And they were aware of their differences, their individual differences. And it just struck me that there's a greater degree of capacity amongst young people to understand that sometimes things need to be done slightly differently for other children. Yeah. And I think, the floodgates don't open if you make a change for one child. No. As long as there is an understanding within the community as to why there needs to be a degree of flexibility.
Yeah.
So I'm the definition of consistency is one that I think really needs, in relation to behaviour in schools, is one that really needs to be thought about at quite a profound level.
Yeah, because it's not uniformity. It's not sameness for everybody.
No, I think it's about, I mean, I wrote an article a while back for the Times Ed where I think there was John Visser, who was professor at the University of Northampton and a very significant player within the SEMH community, talks about rubber band consistency.
Yes.
And you don't not have boundaries.
No.
But you need to understand that sometimes those need to give. And I think it's about having the confidence as a leadership team to be able to take those steps. And if that is communicated to children and also to the adults, because I think it's really important that the adults feel that they are working in an environment where they are safe and confident. But I think that that's entirely possible without necessarily ignoring more individualised approaches that will make a difference for that group of children who don't find a mainstream school environment particularly straightforward to navigate.
Who don't feel like they can bring their authentic self to school.
And that's the thing, and I think within the world of occupational psychology we talk about psychological safety.
Yeah.
And it is about allowing people to bring their authentic selves into whatever environment they're in, whether it be the workplace, whether it be school. Because the implications of that for people realising their professional potential or their potential as a learner within a school environment are compromised if they can't do that. So, you know, at the heart of this really for me is about psychological safety, and I think it's really pertinent to discuss that within the context of behaviour because that's really significant. I think for neurodivergent children and particularly for autistic children, and this extends to ADHDers as well, is that the masking the need to really to try and camouflage yourself in a school setting to fit in, to be normal, comes at a tremendous cost for children in terms of their mental health. So, you know, the fallout from that over a period of time, and it probably really starts to manifest itself quite early on in secondary schools because of the increase in numbers, but it's also developmental in terms of where children are at and that kind of increased social awareness. How those children's needs are met are really, really significant because the fallout of that, and we've experienced this as a family, is significant.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to go back to what we started talking about, you know, what do I think would make the biggest difference? It is about understanding the needs of neurodivergent learners, whether they be dyslexic, dyspraxic, whether they be Tourette's, whether they have whatever it might be. And so I think if you look at any surveys of the teaching workforce, there is an ongoing on-loop message about a need for additional training, a lack of confidence, a lack of insight. And I think when you then see head teachers, you know, dismissing ADHD as a kind of made-up construct and it's all a load of rubbish and it's down to feckless parenting and, you know, too many cans of Red Bull, our starting point is not fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
WhenTheAdultsChange.com